My most memorable student occurred in my last year of teaching, and his name was Gregory. Gregory was the third grader that everyone would want to have. He didn't know the meaning of the word no. If you told him no, it meant that. I'm going to do it! Okay then. So we had had a number of really nice days outside, and several students had been injured jumping out of the swing. So we had an assembly about playground safety, and Gregory was listening, but was he paying attention? So that afternoon after our assembly, we had said, you can play on playground equipment, you can swing on the swing, but no jumping off of the jungle gym and no jumping out of the swing. So Gregory heard that, and what's the first thing he wants to do? So he gets in the swing, he swings really high, and he jumps out, and crunch, broke his leg.
Oh, no.
And it was a series of mishaps the entire year like that with Gregory. But he was a smart kid, and he really liked school, and he taught me a lot about dealing with kids that have some emotional behavioral issues, because he would constantly challenge anything that you said to him. But on the very last day of school, I got this lovely note that said, "Dear Mrs. Kapp, thank you for teaching me all that you had for me to learn, and I'm sorry it was such a pain in the butt. Love you always, Gregory." What Gregory taught me was that just because you tell a kid no doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to behave or do what you want them to. But if you can work with them rather than against them, you know, if you could tell Gregory that he was going to be part of a team and you were going to work on this and be very, very positive with him, he would walk to the ends of the earth for you. Mm-hmm. I saw him about 10 years later when he had graduated college, and he was a manager at a Walmart in a small town in Oklahoma, and he had written me a note saying, you know, if it hadn't been for you, I never would have learned to read, and I wouldn't be where I am today. So. I got into the field of special education, like many others, kind of through the back door. When I was an undergraduate, I was the first one in my family to go to college, and I majored in things I liked. I liked history and theater, majored in those two things, and that with, you know, a quarter at that time would get you a cup of coffee. And so I had to think seriously about how I was going to make a living. I didn't really have the drive to go to New York City or even a regional theater and try to make it as an actress. I knew there were lots of other people that had as much or more talent than I did, and certainly more drive to do it than I did. So I thought, well, I really like kids. I've always worked with kids closely. My theater project, my senior project, was working with children at the Capper Foundation. And so I talked with some of my professors at Washburn, and they said, well, you might want to consider getting your teaching degree. So I spent a year working at a neat place in Topeka called the Adventure Center. And it was a learning center that came out of the Brown versus the Board of Education lawsuit to really give some extra science and math and art and theater and music to kids in USD 501. And so every 5th grade class spent 2 weeks at the Adventure Center, and every 3rd grade class spent 1 week there. So while I was working on getting my teaching credentials and all of that coursework, I was also working there as a para, and that was a neat experience. So in the spring of 1979, I did my student teaching, and at that time, and I think I told this story in class, there were lots and lots of people wanting to do their student teaching, and so they told me that I had a kindergarten placement, which I was really excited about, and then they said it's at the Topeka State Hospital grounds. So I had 12 children in a kindergarten setting with significant social, emotional, and mental health issues. From that population, and this was for my general education, mind you, placement, I found that population just fascinating. And so when I finished my education degree, both the Auburn-Washburn District and USD 501 Topeka said, if you will work on your degree in special education, we will pay for your degree and we'll give you a job when you're done. That didn't take too much persuading. And so I came to K-State to work on my master's in special education. I finished that degree in the fall of 1980, and in January of 1981, I started teaching at a middle school, a junior high in Topeka, Eisenhower Junior High, and had 15 students, 2 or 3 girls and the rest of them were boys. They were all bigger than I was. And I walked into that program to visit it on the 14th of January, ready to start on the 16th. On the 14th of January, I remember walking out to my car. There were no teaching supplies, there were no textbooks, there wasn't anything. There were desks and chairs and kids. And they looked at me like, you're going to teach us what? We dare you to teach us anything. I cried all the way home, but that, to this day, that's still been one of my favorite jobs because I got involved with all these kids and actually taught them a few things. And they certainly taught me more than my fair share of things. This was back in the day when the service delivery model was self-contained, meaning that I had received a master's degree in special education, and my label, my professional label, was as a teacher of children with, in that day called personal and social adjustment issues. We now know them as children with emotional behavior disorders. They change that term every so often. And I was supposed to have all of the skills that I needed in my toolbox to work with the self-contained classroom. And the idea would be that I would gradually, over time, the goal was to eliminate my job by getting these students ready for the mainstream so that they could be in art, PE, music, reading, whatever area. But they needed to have the academic background and they needed to have the social skills so that they could function in that setting. So that was my job. Bob Zabel, who was a professor here at K-State, was probably the biggest influence in that he kept encouraging me to stay in special education. And what he would do, he would encourage me to get the skills that I needed. So I wound up with a degree, a master's in clinical psychology from Washburn, because I wanted to figure these kids out and offer them some counseling skills. In the elementary and middle school setting, counselors didn't want anything to do with my students. And so any kind of, and they all had significant emotional and behavioral issues. Bob helped me set up a morning breakfast program because I had several students that would come to school. And think about if you came to school every morning, or you came to K-State every evening for your class, you came to 7:10 and you were hungry. What would that do to your learning? You'd be more obsessed with needing to eat or to act out rather than to. This was back in the day before there were free and reduced lunch and breakfast programs. He encouraged me to write a small grant, and I wrote a grant to the Dillon's stores. Oh, wow. And Dillon's in Topeka would provide, I would have to come and pick them up, but they would provide muffins and cheese and milk and juice. All I had to do, it was day old, but all I had to do was go and pick it up, and I could feed my 12 children. And just, I thought, well, I could just offer it to 1 or 2 of them, but I thought, even better than that, let's offer it to all of them during first hour, just to have. I said, you know, if you've had breakfast, that's fine. If you haven't, I've got something for you. And I never had anyone turn it down.
Was that daily?
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome.
I did that daily for 4 years of my teaching career. And it made such a difference in the lives of those kids. The other thing that I tried to do was to make sure that they got to know. Kids with emotional behavior disorders sometimes have a bad rap in the school, particularly if they're self-contained. And we worked with other either special education programs or younger kids to get my students placed in there as student helpers.
Oh, yeah.
And amazingly, the younger kids would look up to my kids with EBD, and some of them, that was the first time that they had ever done that. ever been looked up to, and it was like, oh, you know, maybe I'm not such a bad guy after all. All of the different kinds of interventions and strategies that have been developed to work with this particular population. Behavior management programs, positive behavioral supports in schools. Moving away from a self-contained concept to more of an inclusive concept. But most of all, I think the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requiring, you know, putting into law the fact that these children need special services, they need individual education plans, and that that we have to provide those services and supports to them. And then the fact that IDEA also encourages collaboration between parents, the school, general education, and special education teachers. And if you can get that collaboration going, it goes a long way toward providing positive places for kids to be. It's a wonderful field to be in. It's the hardest job that you'll ever have, but it's also the job that you will love the most. I've been in higher ed 18 years, and there's not a day goes by that sometimes I wonder, why am I not still back in the classroom working with kids? So as a matter of fact, that's what I'm going to do in retirement, is to go back and work with children as an individual therapist and work particularly with kids with autism and children with behavior and emotional disorders. I would say when you get into the field, establish networks of people that you know and trust, have a good sense of humor, take care of yourself. Don't be afraid to be in special education. A lot of people say it's an awful place to be. I think the paperwork is awful, but the stuff that you get back from the kids is more than worth it. Make sure that you find a professional organization to belong to. If you're interested in emotional and behavior disorders, for example, there's a great conference called the Midwest Symposium for Leadership and Behavior Disorders. I've gone to that conference. It's a regional conference. It's not real expensive. It occurs the third week of February every year, and that's what I consider my professional home.